Welcome to ATF, After the Fire, a line of duty death podcast brought to you by the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation in collaboration with firefighterskills.com. I'm your host, John Nelson. Today in episode 2, although we are continuing the discussion on the 1941 Strand Theater fire from episode 1, we direct our focus to the 1977 near miss of Brockton, Massachusetts Fire Department Captain Joseph Lacouture. Let's dive right in. Captain Lacouture, you had a significant near miss in a 2.5-story structure. Please tell us your story, how it ties into the line of duty death we are discussing today, and some lessons learned that you can share with us.
Well, we were responding to a report of a 2.5 fire in the Campello section. When we reported to the scene, the incident commander, at the time was a deputy, ordered us to the top floor. So we took an attack line up, 1.5 inch line to the top floor. Somewhere on the way up, I lost contact with my officer and the other firefighter that I was assigned with. I got to the top floor with the line, and I came across another officer who ordered me to the front room. So we dragged the line to the front room. It was, the atmosphere was okay at that point. So he said to me, stand here with the line. I'm going to go get a plaster hook. That's to open the ceilings. While he was gone, I was just standing there waiting. I had the line in my hand, and I felt like a push. It wasn't painful or nothing. It was just like a door pushing down on me. I fell to the floor, and I was on the floor. I knew what had happened at that point. I had the line in my right hand, and I lifted my left hand, hoping at that point that whatever was on me, I could get off. And the ceiling, I pushed right through it, and I stood up. At that point, the fire that was over my head came down, and I was standing looking at it. I backed up a little bit, leaned against the wall, and turned the line on. I was going to try to put it out, or at least help myself with it. At that point, the supply line out in the street burst, and the line in my hand went dead.
What size line and nozzle were you on at that time?
I had a pre-connect, what they call a pre-connect line. It was 1.5 inches with a combination nozzle, 400 gallons. And when that went dead, I was in trouble. I had no protection. And I could not see the entrance that I came in. And there was a window in front, and I knew where that window was, and I just headed for the window. And I made it out onto a small balcony that was for the second floor. And they had put the ladder from the street up to it, and I climbed down. I got to the street, and at that point, I really didn't feel too much pain. So, and then it started. When the air hit the exposed skin, I could feel the pain. So I walked down the street. I got into a police cruiser, and they took me to the hospital. Now, if I can back up, on the way to the fire, I could hear on the radio they reported a working fire. So at that point, our turnout gear was not like it is today. It was rubber boots, a canvas coat, and a helmet. So I said, I put one rubber boot on, and I went to take my left shoe, and I had a double knot in it. I couldn't get it off. I said, I don't want to stand out in the street with one boot and one shoe. I look like So I took the rubber boot off, put my shoe back on. So I was told by the doctors that I had a lot of steam burns from, exposure. And I'm thinking about it. And since then, when Chief Galligan came in, he brought in the new bunker gear. And I'm thinking about it. I said, with that new bunker gear, that if I had it at that point, I might have escaped with no injuries at all, opposed to first, second, and third degree burns. So I guess I was kind of lucky, because if you look at the books, they say the skin burns in a short period of time, 1 or 2 seconds. I don't think I had more than 4 seconds. If I had gone past 4 seconds, I would have died there.
What kind of respiratory protection did you have there?
We had a self-contained breathing apparatus. I did have that on. When I went out the window, I was hoping that it wouldn't get stuck on the top sill of the window. But I made it through. And I was looking at some old pictures that they had that window the top part of the window was still in before we got there, and that ladder crew had taken it out because it was clean. When I came out of the window, it was completely vented.
Is there anything you could have done that would have given you a better outcome?
Not go all the way into that front room, but I mean, when I walked into that front room, it wasn't much different than this room. Everything was buried behind the knee walls and in the ceiling. And then when it broke loose, the whole thing collapsed. That's the only thing other than having better equipment. I had a pair of gloves on that were, you wouldn't even use today for gardening. They were cloth gloves, and I suffered burns to my hands, my wrists, and I suffered burns to my right ear because of the self-contained breathing apparatus was rubber. Part of it was the harness to hold it was rubber, and that had melted along with my ear.
Chief, you have some diagrams and photos from your presentation on 2.5-story fires, which we'll be posting on the website accompanying this podcast. Would you mind talking about knee wall construction and how these fires run and get on top of firefighters like Captain Lacouture experienced before they realize what's actually going on?
Sure. And I think what we need to realize here is that there are some similarities between what happened in the theater and what happened to Joe. The firefighters that were working in the theater, it appears as though they felt pretty confident that they were safe where they were, and they had this fire well under control. In the case of Joe's fire, it is similar in that a 2.5-story wood frame, of which there are many, many thousands of them in the Northeast. To get to the top floor, there's only one stairway, and that's the stairway that's in the rear. And what Joe referenced is that he, with other firefighters, went up those stairs to the top floor, and when they went in that top floor area, the atmosphere was nothing to get really concerned about. Obviously, there was a fire in the house. They were sent to the top floor to investigate to see if the fire had extended to the top floor. And as Joe said a few minutes ago, it was very tenable on that top floor. Nothing to get concerned about.
Chief, hold that thought for 1 second. Captain Lacouture, you mentioned getting separated from your crew, but that the environment was tenable. Did you ever find out why that happened?
No, I'm not sure why. But I know when I got to the top floor, there was another fire. The other office was there. He grabbed me. He says, "Come on, we got to go to the front of the room. We got to get the ceiling down."
Never found out.
I never found out.
All right, Chief, as you were saying.
All right. So anyway, let's get back to the situation where here we have firefighters on the top floor. Joe's the nozzle guy, and the officer is with him. Everything looks like it's pretty good, and the officer makes the decision, I think we should probably pierce this ceiling to see if we have any fire up above us. At that point, they needed to get a hook to open the ceiling, so the officer turned to get a hook when the fire that was burning in the knee walls, which is the shot wall on either side of the room, was burning in that knee wall and was also burning in the ceiling area above them. So what Joe didn't realize is that there was fire all around him. And in that type of building, that can happen without the person that's in the living area knowing that there's fire left and right and above. So the fire officer made the decision, we need to pierce the ceiling to check to see if we have any fire up above us. So when he went to get the hook, the fire apparently had burned the wooden laths to the point where the fire built up pressure. It couldn't relieve itself, and the path of least resistance was the burned laths above Joe's head, and the ceiling collapsed down on top of Joe. At that point, the fire ventilated itself. It's like a tiger in a cage that wants to get out. And the ceiling coming down is like opening the door of the cage, and down came the fire. And it came down right on top of Joe. Now, Joe was trapped with fire between where he is and the back door that he came up. So the only way he could get out was through the front window. And he made the decision that he was going to go for that front window. A firefighter that was in the position that Joe was in is going to make every effort not to burn up. So you're going to do whatever you can to get out of this atmosphere. So his thought was, I'm getting out of here and I'm going out that window. And fortunately, when he went out the window, the aerial ladder was at the window. He was able to get to the aerial ladder and a roof area where he could step aside. you're going to see in these pictures that you have Joe actually coming out the window with fire all around him. And once Joe is out onto the roof, that entire window is filled with fire coming out. So the parallel that we're trying to draw here between what happened in the theater is the fire was burning undetected, and the tiger coming out of the cage was the failure of the roof structure. In Joe's case, the fire was burning all around him and above him. It was building up pressure, and it was looking for a way to vent itself. And the only way it found the ventilation was to come down through the ceiling. Today, you will notice that the aerial ladder very often will go right to the top of the roof, what we call the peak or the ridgepole. And you'll see firefighters going up there with a saw to cut a hole in the roof. And to the average person, they have no idea, why is this guy cutting a hole in the roof? And the whole purpose of cutting that hole is to open the cage to let the tiger out. So if there's any fire like what Joe had above him, instead of the fire venting down, the fire is going to ventilate out the hole that the firefighters make.
Do you think the guys at the Strand could have done that?
Don't know. Somebody made the decision to attempt that because when you talk to Sonny Burrell, the retired chief, he was on ladder 2, and they were told to get to the roof of the theater. In order to get to the roof of the theater, they had to get a ladder to go from the roof of the building adjacent to it, which was higher than the roof of the theater. And it would appear that they were going to go down onto that roof, most likely to vent that roof. And the only reason they survived was the fact that they had to go back and get the ladder to get on the roof. So if you want to draw some parallels, even in 1941, knowing that fire perhaps was burning in the cockloft, and the way to let it out is to vent the roof, it's very similar to what we do today, to put a hole in the roof to let the fire out so that what happened to Joe won't happen again. So I guess the whole purpose of what we're talking about here is almost like a lessons learned, which we'll get into.
Right. Yeah.
But I think anybody that listens to this or watches this has to understand why firefighters put holes in roofs.
Yeah, when the fire and all of its energy can't vertically ventilate through a roof, it's going to build and find that path of least resistance. Joe, what was the fire's behavior on your near miss?
The window that I came out of was completely cleared out. They took it right out. And when the ceiling fell and the fire got some oxygen, it blew out that window like a blowtorch. When I was out on the deck, there was another firefighter on the ladder. We had to move over a little bit because you could hear it. And I could hear people out in the street going, ooh. I said, hey, that's me. I got to get out of here. That's me. I got to get out of here.
Joe, thanks for sharing your story with us today. Let's get into the lessons learned. Chief, you've developed quite the comprehensive course on 2.5-story structure fires. What lessons have we learned from fires like the 1941 Strand Theater fire and Captain Lacouture's fire in the early 70s that have enhanced our understanding today? To what should firefighters everywhere be paying attention?
Well, I think the whole purpose of what we're talking about today is to try to prevent tragedies in the future that mimic what we're talking about. And being a firefighter, you never stop learning. And you learn oftentimes by experiencing fires, what we call boots on the street, that you go to a number of fires and you learn. Sometimes you have close calls. Like I say, sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. But the important thing is that a firefighter that responds to the fire comes back to the station after the fire is out. That's the bottom line of what we're trying to do here. We get paid to save lives and to save property. And we do the best we can with what we have to work with. But staffing of fire trucks and staffing of fire scenes, it's no different today than it was in 1941. In order to be successful and to get ahead of a fire, you've got to be smarter than the fire. You've got to outwit the fire and to do certain tasks on the fire ground that require sufficient staffing. And every fire department, I think, in the country suffers that problem of having 17 different things to do initially, and we don't have enough people to do all that we want to do. So to learn from these types of fires, if you are the company officer and you're up on the top floor of a fire like Joe has, maybe today when we get to the top of the stairs is where we're going to check the ceiling to see if we have any fire rather than going all the way to the front room. Now, if that fire hadn't come down on Joe, I'm sure that as soon as they hit that ceiling with a hook, the same result would have happened. So in this class that we do on fires in 2.5-story wood frames, we have found that there are so many similarities in these buildings and so many fires have caused injury to firefighters and firefighters have died in these fires that we want to educate younger firefighters that may not have experienced what Joe experienced to see what happened to Joe and see why it happened. So if we're talking about ventilating a building, a fire in the top floor of a 2.5, if a department doesn't have a ladder truck and you send crews to the top floor without ventilation, that's a very risky thing to do. And quite frankly, in some rural areas, they may not be as successful as putting a fire out as, say, a municipal department, simply because they don't have the resources, they don't have the manpower. But if you come from a city fire department, we know there are very basic things that we do on a routine basis. And if you understand why you do those things and what everybody's role is, we can eliminate serious injuries or deaths. But quite frankly, in Old Town America, like we see in the big cities, you're going to see hundreds and hundreds of buildings that are strand theaters.
Oh, yeah.
There are large buildings with trusses. They're all over Old Town America. So if you pay attention to what we've talked about here with the Strand Theater, I would hope that once you walk in a theater, you're going to stop and you're going to look around and say, wow, there's no support columns anywhere. We must be dealing with trusses. So the tactics, even as a chief officer, learning from what happened at the Strand Theater, hearing Joe's personal account of what happened to him, when you pull up to a fire in a 2.5-story house, you're going to look at that house and you're going to say, there's Joe Lacouture up in the window up there. I got to get a ladder up to make sure that if those guys get trapped on the top floor, that not only do they have the back stairway, but they have a ladder to come down.
And now we're talking about being a proactive driver, RIC, or outside truck company, softening the building for the firefighters inside.
You're in the fire service. We know that the best friend of an engine company guy is a truckie. And a truckie is a ladder guy, by the way.
Yeah.
And the ladder truck most of the time has a 100-foot aerial, and they got to be in the right position to do what they got to do. So when you pull into a building fire like we're talking, the ladder truck has priority. The ladder truck has certain duties to perform that are going to save lives, not only for firefighters that are going in the building, but civilians that are in the building. So these are the lessons that the ladder truck can't be parked 2 houses down the street. They got to be parked right in front of the building. They got to be proactive. They got to do what they got to do. And any fire department that is going to attempt to save buildings has to get inside of buildings. You're never going to save buildings by squirting water at a building from the outside. So when you look at the Strand Theater, the firefighters are very aggressive. They go in, they're doing things that they think are safe. Joe's case, they go into a 2.5-story wood frame. There's people on the first floor, the second floor. Joe's assignment was to the top floor. So the city departments are very aggressive guys. And again, when I want to get back to what I said a few minutes ago about how important it is that if you're going to be an aggressive interior firefighting force, you've got to have the right number of people on the fireground to do the jobs.
Chief, you've created a class on fires in 2.5-story wood frames, which I encourage everyone to try to attend in some way or another. How did that class come to be?
The reason that happened was I was asked to share some of my knowledge that I gained over the 41 years. I was very fortunate that in my career, we had a lot of structure fires in the 70s and 80s. All over the country, there was a lot of fires. And what I'm trying to do is take that knowledge that I have gained, and I'm trying to give that back to young fire officers and young firefighters to learn from experiences. When you think about it, a guy like myself can walk out the door with all my experience, close the door and walk away, and a young guy walking in starts to learn this thing all over again. So the whole purpose of what we're doing today is to try to share that knowledge to prevent some of these tragedies from happening.
So if you were to pass on specific knowledge pertaining to line of duty deaths and near misses in a 2.5-story wood frame structure, what would you say?
Well, first of all, everybody on the fire ground has a job. There can never be any freelancing. So if prior to the fire, a well-honed department that has assignments for particular companies, they know that when they go into this 2.5-story wood frame, there are certain duties for the first engine company, the second engine company, the ladder company, the rescue company. And if everybody does their job, 99 times out of 100, you're going to be successful. If somebody doesn't do their job, the whole company can get lost. If that company fails to do their job, it has a direct relationship on all of the other companies at the fire. So every firefighter on the ground has a responsibility. And for safety, the chief officer is the guy or gal who is in charge or responsible for the safety of the firefighters. But it's a two-way street. A firefighter has a responsibility to the incident commander to do what he's supposed to do and to be where he's supposed to be. And, in the case of a firefighter getting lost, one of the things that we have is a pass alarm. And just a quick story, when I bought pass alarms for firefighters, there was a little bit of a reluctance to wear them, like a lot of things happen. And finally I said to him, you know what, I want you to turn that pass alarm on for your wife and kids. And you know what happened? I had 100% compliance.
It's home.
It does hit home. And a case like Joe, he was able to get up and get to the window and get out. But what happens if he was lost on the top floor? If there was no accountability, if there was, he could have been laying up there for 15 minutes before he was discovered lost. So today, we have accountability systems where the incident commander who's running the operation knows where the companies are. The companies need to be where they're told to go. So it works both ways. And today, that's a big thing on the fire ground.
Yeah, and we must learn through training to efficiently and wholly acclimate to these positive changes in procedure and equipment.
Well, there's a couple of things that we talked about when we were thinking about putting this program together, is comparing some firefighting things that we do today, some of the assets that we have today compared to what they had in 1941. In Nicole's book, you're going to read in there about Lieutenant McRae, who was wearing rubber gloves that experienced heat on his hands, and the rubber gloves melted and actually melted all his fingers. He went through painful surgeries. He was out of work for well over a year. And today, in our department in Brockton, we do not allow firefighters to wear rubber gloves as gloves that you would wear when you're attacking the fire. When we're picking up hose lines and whatever, guys do wear rubber gloves. But gloves are very important to protect your hands, but you cannot wear rubber gloves. As Joe mentioned, the gear that we wore at his time and the Strand Theater, basically you had a canvas coat, a helmet, and rubber boots. Today, we kind of encapsulate the firefighters in what we call as bunker gear. So your entire body is encapsulated. That has created new problems because now firefighters overheat from the inside rather than from the outside. And the other thing, of course, is we have better protection for our heads. We wear hoods that protect our rears and everything. So really, I think the fire service has come a long way in providing protection for the firefighters. Again, the responsibility now is on the firefighter that if the department provides you with all of this protective clothing, it's up to you to make sure that you're properly wearing it. So I can tell you that I'll buy you all the best gear, but if you don't want to wear it, what good is it?
And that goes into making sure you're doing routine inspections at the beginning of each shift and after an incident or after a cleaning.
Mm-hmm. We have pass alarms today, a personal safety device that is a little yellow box that the firefighters wear. And if you're moving, there is an alarm that will not go off. But if, like in Joe's case, if he was laying on the floor and not moving because the plastic came down on him, this pass alarm would emit a loud noise. And all the firefighters recognize that alarm. And if they hear the alarm, they know there's a firefighter in trouble. The self-contained breathing apparatus that they didn't have during the Strand, they had what they call Chemox masks at the time. They were rebreathers. They were not a very good device. It was something that came over from shipboard Navy firefighting that was incorporated. It really didn't work that well. But every firefighter today has a tank on his back with air, not oxygen, so he doesn't have to breathe the toxic atmosphere that's out there today. The smoke today is totally different than it was back in those days, particularly with the plastics. We talked about radios, the failure of communication from inside the theater to outside of the theater. Today, not only do the officers have a radio, but every firefighter has a radio. And it's very important that as decisions are being made on the fire ground, the firefighters are up to speed on what's going on. So if we decide we're going to pull everybody out of a building, instantaneously, everybody gets that message. If somebody on the top floor sees something that the incident commander should know about, which would affect a decision, that's instantaneously put out there. So communications on the fire service today are far better than they were both at the time when Joe was trapped on the top floor and when these firefighters were working in the Strand Theater. We have a very formal incident command system today where the individual who is running this incident is in a very formal area, usually in front of the building, and everything at this incident goes through him. And that's formal incident command. We call him the deputy chief. Today we call him the incident commander.
And can you give a little more information on what that incident command structure looks like?
Sure. The incident commander, at least in the city of Brockton, is fortunate to have what we call an aide. That is another firefighter that works with him. They work as a pair. They're married together. Think of this now. A company that goes out always has 3 or 4 people on the company. When the incident commander goes out without an aide, he's all by himself. He has a tremendous amount of responsibility to make decisions that are going to affect those companies that he's in charge of. The aide is a firefighter who assists him in making a 360 circle of the building where we may have people hanging out the back of the building that we don't see from the front. So incident command with the aide and the communications of the company officers, the incident commander now is kept up to speed moment by moment of what's transpiring on the fire ground. The other thing, training today is a lot different than it was years ago. When you think of the fire service years ago, we put water on the fire, we put ladders up, we made rescue of people, but everything hinged on fires in buildings. When you look at what firefighters do today with how society has changed, we get people out of wrecked automobiles. We take people out of cave-ins, trench rescues. We're now doing shooter training in schools. And the biggest thing I think the fire service has taken on is emergency medical services. I mean, when you have a heart attack today, you're getting a first responder on a fire truck, an ambulance that could be a paramedic. They're fully trained in the best first aid that you can get. And firefighters years ago were trained in first aid, but it was never like what you're getting today. So if you suffer a heart attack today and call 911, you're going to get some firefighters that probably are going to make a drastic change in the outcome of your survivability, whereas many, many years ago, that probably wasn't the case.
Yeah, with that said, today's firefighter has to be good at everything. But we can't forget to practice the things that can save our lives, like practicing a Mayday, and practicing these scenarios that we don't want your first time to be doing them when your heart's pounding out of your chest and it's a matter of life or death.
What we tell them today with radios is if you ever get in trouble, the best thing to do is to come on the radio and say, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Firefighter Jones. I'm on floor 2 in the front living room and I'm trapped. If you can do that, it helps us immensely to know who you are, where you are, and what your problem is. If you push the emergency button, we only know you're in trouble, and the incident commander is the only one who knows where you are. So it's like a double safety system. So obviously at the Strand Theater, they had none of that stuff. And Joe, when he got in trouble, didn't have a radio on him. So somebody had to know where he was on the top floor. And fortunately, he self-extricated and got out of the building. But if he was trapped on that top floor, hopefully somebody would immediately know that he's missing. And if you don't have accountability, if a firefighter gets separated, then who is that person that is watching out for Joe?
Which harkens back to being aware of your surroundings. Captain Lacouture knew the location of the window he extricated from because before he went in, he looked up and knew what the house looked like. When he went upstairs and the environment was tenable, he knew the layout of that room and the location of that window. Being situationally aware saved Captain Lacouture's life.
Yes, and you know, on this class on 2.5-story wood frames, it's amazing. I have had at least 2,500 students that have gone through this class now, and I have had numerous stories that I had never heard before of firefighters that went to the top floor. They opened up the knee wall. The fire blew out to such an extent that they ran for their lives for the back stairs. And these stories are out there that need to be shared. And that's what this class is about. And that's hopefully what we're doing here. And Joe is a very graphic show of what can happen so quickly on a top floor. And thank God Joe survived. And here he is telling his story. So let's learn from what happened to Joe, try to find out why it happened, and let's make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. The fire service now, after several of these fires, knows the danger of trusses. We got the Strand Theater. We had the automotive store in New Jersey. Hackensack was a truss collapse. We had that Walburn's supermarket in New York City, all truss related. And if you read Brannigan's book that he wrote back in the early 1970s, in italics, he says, beware of the truss. So firefighters today, hearing this podcast that you're doing, hopefully are going to learn that the top floor of a 2.5 is a pretty dangerous area. Working in any building with trusses is dangerous. Not only the Strand Theater steel truss, but when you look at new construction with glued laminated beams, once a fire gets to these glued laminated beams and the glue lets go, that beam loses its strength and collapses. So even in a ranch house, a modern style ranch house, there is a possibility that you can have structural failure, whereas in older cities like ours, where 2.5s and 3-deckers were overbuilt with full 2x10s, full 2x12, they don't usually collapse. But anything that has to do with a truss, whenever you lose any part of a truss, it loses its stability and, down it comes. So again, these are the lessons that I hope that people that are going to be listening to this and watching this will take away from this and go out and talk to other people. Talk it up. You're going to find other people that said, you know what, I experienced something very similar to that.
Yeah, we hope listeners of this podcast tell their stories with us and get involved by sharing their experiences and information. Chief, you mentioned building construction. It's so important for crews to work with their plans departments or prevention departments to review pre-plans of their area. If there's a new building going up, go check it out. Look at the insides. Familiarity with this kind of stuff can only help you on your worst day when there's an actual emergency there.
So think of this too. This is kind of bizarre. People today will spend thousands of dollars to put sprinklers in their yard to keep the grass nice and green. But would they ever think about putting sprinklers in their residential homes? Now, the Strand Theater was 13 firefighters, a very large loss of life in one building. Do you realize that how many people die in fires, die in their own home? When you go to a building like we're in right now that's fully protected, this place is safe. It's got sprinklers, it's got panic doors, it's got everything. But people in their own homes die in their own homes because they don't have either early notification or sprinklers. Now, a smoke detector will warn you that things are not good and you need to get out of the house. If you don't react to that smoke alarm, you might as well disregard it. The smoke alarm is trying to tell you something. A sprinkler system will immediately start putting water on the fire. So you could do something stupid like smoking in bed and set your mattress on fire, but that sprinkler will at least knock the fire down. So that saves lives of not only people in the building, but it saves firefighter lives. If we have sprinklers that are working when we get there, most of the time it's kind of a cleanup operation for us.
Sprinklers hit all the right notes. They save lives, stabilize incidents, and conserve property. Are we moving to all residents having sprinklers installed?
There are people that think that every residential house should have sprinklers. In this area, we have subdivisions where the subdivision is so far from the nearest fire station that the builder building the house has installed sprinklers. And it's a tremendous selling feature when you sell the house that you've got sprinklers in the house. So firefighters have to realize, too, that if a sprinkler system is going off before we get there, it's going to make our job much easier. And if you look at a building that's got 100 sprinkler heads in it, that's like having 100 firefighters standing on guard with a hose line in their hand, waiting for a fire to break out. So here's a case here where the Strand Theater only had sprinklers over the stage. It did not have sprinklers in the areas where the fire was traveling.
And those sprinklers were never activated, right?
No, I don't think they were.
Was it a dry system?
Our reports were that it was a dry system. Yeah.
Wow, Chief, you're such a wealth of information. This has been quite the enlightening discussion. I want to thank each and every one of you for participating in the podcast today. Chief, if you don't mind, please let everyone know how they may gain access to your class on fires and 2.5-story wood frame construction.
Well, the 2.5-story wood frame construction class is presented through the Mass Fire Academy. So if somebody wanted that class, most likely I'm going to be the guy that'll give the class, but you would contact the Mass Fire Academy and go from there.
Which can be found on the website mass.gov and search for Firefighter Academy. I also want to remind listeners that they can donate to the Brockton Fire Museum and purchase Nicole Casper's book on the 1941 Strand Theater fire from episode 1 at Brockton Historical Society Inc. That's INC.com. Again, that's Brockton Historical Society Inc.com. I also encourage everyone to visit the Brockton Fire Museum if you're up north and in the Boston area. Their address is 216 North Pearl Street in Brockton, Massachusetts. Zip code 02301. You can also mail them a check if you wanted to donate to them at that address. Again, that's 216 North Pearl Street, Brockton, Massachusetts, 02301. Proceeds from Nicole's book go to help the activities of the Brockton Fire Museum, so go get your copy today. And if you want to dive deeper into the related documents, videos, and links, you should visit firefighterskills.com for all the extras on this and every ATF episode. Additionally, the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation is updating their site, fireherolearningnetwork.com. Again, that's fireherolearningnetwork.com. There you'll find a ton of educational material for our industry, and that is soon to include a link to the ATF podcast, so we're pretty excited about putting that up. Oh, and I failed to mention, firefighterskills.com and Fire Hero Learning Network are both absolutely free. Go check them out. And in remembrance of our fallen firefighters, please check out the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation website at firehero.org. Again, I want to thank Brockton Chief Kevin Galligan for not only guiding us through Brockton, but also for being there for me anytime I send him a random firefighter-related text. Thank you very much, Chief. Also, Scott Cohen and Jessica Williams at Stonehill College, thank you for helping us out with the podcast studio. We could not have set this up without you. You guys made it very painless. Thank you so much. Nicole Casper, thank you for your tireless effort to preserve history and for going the extra mile to put the pieces together to make this happen for the first 2 episodes. We really appreciate everything you've done. And the man to whom this episode was based around, Captain Joseph Lacouture. Your heroism and willingness to share your near miss will hopefully inspire many others to do the same. Thank you, sir. And last but certainly not least, Chief Kenneth Galligan. It's been a pleasure working with you, Chief. You're an inspiration to all of us. Thank you. If anybody out there has any questions, concerns, comments, or you want to share your fireground stories, please email me, John Nelson, at info@firefighterskills.com. Again, that email address, info@firefighterskills.com. Join us for episode 3 when we discuss the 1984 Confined Space LODD of Phoenix Fire Department's Ricky Pierce. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing your experience, and we'll see you after the fire.